I was washing dishes when the phone buzzed on the counter, the familiar ding of a message breaking the quiet of my afternoon. I dried my hands on my apron and glanced down. It was from my cousin Lila. We hadn't spoken much lately. She'd moved closer to Ethan's side of the city, the upscale part, as my neighbors like to call it. The message was short. Just wanted to make sure you got this. See you there, I hope? Beneath it, an image of a digital invitation. Ethan and Brielle, engagement celebration this Saturday. Champagne and silk attire encouraged. The location, some estate with a name like a vineyard. My eyes scanned the details again. No envelope had arrived in the mail. No call, no word from Ethan. Just a forwarded message from someone outside the core of it all. My hands, still damp from the sink, trembled slightly as I held the phone. It was Thursday. The party was in 2 days. A strange weight settled in my chest, like the familiar ache that comes when you realize you've been quietly forgotten, not through malice, but through some more casual kind of erasure, the kind that tells you you're no longer part of the center. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, staring at the screen, rereading the message. Not even my name on it. Just a generic graphic with swirling fonts and champagne bubbles. I had raised Ethan on my own after George passed. Brought him to piano lessons, baked cookies for his science fair, sat through winter plays in drafty auditoriums. And now I was a last-minute RSVP, an afterthought forwarded like a group flyer. I typed back a polite reply to Lila. Thank you for sending this. I hadn't received it. I'll try to come. I ended it with a smile emoji I didn't feel. Then I turned off the faucet, set the dishcloth on the counter, and walked to my bedroom. If I was going to be a ghost at my own son's celebration, I'd need something decent to wear. The bedroom was quiet except for the soft creak of the floorboards under my feet. Afternoon light poured in through the curtains, making the dust in the air shimmer like something almost holy. I opened the closet doors slowly, as if expecting something to fall out. The smell hit me first, a mix of lavender sachets and old cedar, the kind of scent that belongs to time more than anything else. I stood there, staring at rows of neatly pressed clothes I hadn't touched in months, maybe years. Cardigans, modest skirts, a few pairs of well-worn shoes. Practical, dependable, like me. On the far left, protected by a plastic sleeve, was the dress. Deep navy with a soft floral pattern, a slight flare at the waist. I pulled it out gently and ran my hand along the fabric. It was the dress I wore to George's retirement dinner. I remembered how proud he looked that night. His hand warm on my back, his voice full of gratitude when he raised a glass and said I had been his anchor. That was one of the last evenings we had together before the cancer took root. The dress still held a trace of his cologne in the collar. I held it close for a moment, just breathing. It was old, not trendy, not elegant in the way Ethan's circle might expect. But it was clean, pressed, and mine. I tried it on. The fit was snug around the arms, but not unkind. In the mirror, I saw a woman who didn't look like she belonged in estate gardens or champagne-colored rooms, but who had stood through storms, who had built a life from scratch, and who somehow still showed up. I picked out a simple pearl necklace from the drawer, the one Ethan gave me when he was 10, bought with allowance money saved for months. Then I took out the small blue clutch I hadn't used since my niece's wedding. The dress would do. I would do. I sat on the edge of the bed and folded my hands in my lap. Saturday was coming, whether I was ready or not. But I'd walk in wearing something with meaning, even if no one there remembered it. The gravel crunched beneath the wheels as the taxi turned onto the long driveway. I sat with my purse clutched tightly in my lap, watching as rows of manicured hedges gave way to a sprawling estate I'd only seen in magazines, the kind where everything had a name. the terrace, the conservatory, the East Wing. The kind where mothers like me weren't usually invited unless they were serving hors d'oeuvres. As we pulled up to the front entrance, I saw waiters in white jackets whisking flutes of champagne onto mirrored trays. Soft jazz played somewhere in the background, subtle but deliberate. A valet approached the car. I stepped out, suddenly aware of my shoes. Low-heeled, sensible, slightly scuffed from the sidewalk outside my church. The valet gave me a small nod and reached for my coat, his eyes flickering briefly over my dress. I imagined what he saw. Someone out of place, standing in front of ornate double doors, clinging to a purse that didn't match anything. "Invitation?" a young woman asked at the door, not unkindly, just perfunctory. I fumbled in my bag for the printed screenshot. Her eyes darted to it, then back to my face. "You're Ethan's—" "His mother," I said. Her smile returned in an instant, but I could feel the adjustment in her tone. Not warm, not cold, just edited. Inside, the space unfolded in golden light. Tall ceilings, towering floral centerpieces, waiters weaving between guests in gowns and tuxedos. Everyone glittered. The chatter was soft and polite, punctuated by the sound of crystal clinking. I stood near the entry for a moment, letting the scene blur around me. I felt like someone stepping into a painting. Beautiful, carefully composed, and completely unreal. A woman brushed past me in a silk cape, her perfume sharp and expensive. My dress suddenly felt like paper. I saw Ethan across the room laughing, a champagne glass in hand, his arm around Brielle's waist. He didn't see me. I swallowed hard and stepped further in. The party had started long before I arrived. I walked toward the far wall, where a quieter corner of the room offered a bit of shade from the chandeliers. The room was warm with the weight of money. Everything gleamed. Chairs with gold-painted backs. Plates with silver trim. Waiters in black vests floated past, offering small plates of things I couldn't pronounce. I stood near a small side table, pretending to admire the centerpiece. I could feel the glances before I saw them. One woman, in a tight emerald gown, leaned toward her friend and whispered behind a hand. Her gaze swept over me like a scanner, and though she smiled when our eyes met, it was the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. The kind you give someone when you're not sure what they're doing there. A man in a navy suit approached with a tray of champagne. "Oh, good," he said brightly. "We could use help in the back with clearing the dessert table." He thought I was staff. My mouth opened, then closed. "I'm not," I began, but he was already halfway across the room, handing off his glass. I let out a small breath, folded my hands in front of me, and kept standing. Ethan hadn't noticed me yet. Or maybe he had and chose not to. I wasn't sure which would hurt more. Brielle was in a pale blush dress that looked like it cost more than my car. Her nails were done in perfect ovals. I remembered trimming Ethan's nails at the kitchen table with safety clippers when he was 5. She reached up and adjusted his collar, smiling like she belonged to him, and he to her. I turned my eyes away. A man brushed past me and offered a polite nod, then kept walking. Another woman looked at me, smiled tightly, and said, "The kitchen is down that hall, I think." I realized then that it wasn't just the dress. It was the way I stood, the way I looked around like I didn't belong. Because maybe I didn't. Not in this room, not in this version of his life. I lifted my chin slightly, smoothed the fabric over my hip, and walked toward the bar. If I was going to be mistaken for someone else, I'd at least have a drink in my hand. I saw him before he saw me, or maybe he did see me and chose not to react. Ethan stood near the piano, surrounded by people whose names I didn't know and whose laughter felt just a little too polished. He wore a dark tailored suit I didn't recognize, his hair slicked neatly, his stance loose, comfortable, like he belonged in this world. A woman with slick red lips leaned into him, saying something that made him laugh. The sound made me ache. He used to laugh like that at home, after I burned dinner or mispronounced a movie star's name. I walked toward him, slow and careful, weaving through gowns and heels and sharp colognes. When I was close enough, I said softly, "Ethan." He turned, almost startled, then quickly shifted his face into something resembling a smile. "Mom, you made it." His voice was polite. Nothing more. I tried to hug him, but he only offered one arm, a quick pat on my back, and then he stepped away, already scanning the room. "Did you have trouble finding the place?" "No," I said, trying to meet his eyes. "It's beautiful." "Yeah, Brielle's parents really went all out," he replied, glancing past me. "They're amazing, honestly. Have you met them yet?" I opened my mouth to answer, but before I could, she appeared. Brielle. Impossibly thin, her dress falling around her like champagne poured in silk. She didn't look at me. Her eyes were on Ethan. She leaned in, whispered something that made his mouth twitch into a laugh, and just like that, they turned and drifted toward a group near the fireplace. I stood there for a beat too long, my hands hanging at my sides. I had imagined something different. A small embrace. A quiet, "You look nice, Mom." But all I got was a handshake disguised as a hug, and eyes that kept looking elsewhere. I stepped back toward the wall and smoothed my dress again, though the wrinkles were already set. I was here technically, but I was already somewhere else in his life. The party had settled into that elegant hum of expensive comfort, forks clinking, laughter rising in waves, polite nods exchanged like currency. I sat near the French doors that led to the garden, tucked behind a marble column and a too-tall fern. A waiter passed me twice without offering a refill. I didn't mind. I had nowhere else to be but there, in the shadow of everything. From my chair, I watched Ethan take the small stage near the grand piano. A hush fell over the room, followed by soft applause. He cleared his throat, smiling the way people do when they know everyone's watching. "First of all," he began, "thank you all for being here tonight. Brielle and I are overwhelmed with gratitude to be surrounded by such incredible people." There were nods, claps. A few cameras rose. I stayed still. "To Brielle's parents, thank you for making this entire evening possible. You've welcomed me into your home, your family, your world. I couldn't have asked for better role models." The crowd murmured approval. Brielle beamed beside him, squeezing his hand. My name wasn't mentioned. Not once. He spoke of mentors, of colleagues, of gratitude for love and support. But none of it pointed to the woman who had sat beside his hospital bed when he had pneumonia at 9, who had worked nights sewing buttons back onto his school shirts. I wasn't erased, just edited out. I took a sip of my lukewarm wine. Across the room, a woman in emerald green nodded approvingly. Another dabbed her eyes. I smiled faintly, the kind of smile that masks a wound so old it no longer bleeds, just aches when pressed. My son stood tall, proud, framed in gold light and promise, and I sat beneath a palm frond, invisible, a relic with no placard. I glanced at the watch on my wrist. The speech was still going. Applause rose again. I placed my glass carefully on the tray of a passing waiter and folded my hands in my lap. I had raised a man who knew how to command a room. I just hadn't expected him to leave me sitting in the corner of it. I hadn't moved much since the speech. People floated past in sequined gowns and velvet jackets, their laughter lifting and dipping like a practiced melody. My chair had become a kind of island, safe, quiet, mostly forgotten. A waiter passed behind me, balancing a silver tray with tall flutes of champagne. One of the guests nearby gestured a little too broadly, their elbow nudging him mid-turn. The tray tilted. The glasses clinked. A rush of bubbles and cold ran down my arm and across my lap. "Oh!" I gasped, more out of surprise than anything. The waiter blanched, quickly pulling a napkin from his pocket. I'm so sorry, ma'am." He dabbed at my skirt quickly, then looked up and realized something. I wasn't just staff. I wasn't someone he knew. I was a guest. Sort of. "It's all right," I said, forcing a smile. He hesitated, then hurried off with his empty tray. Around me, a few people looked over, then away. No one offered another napkin. No one asked if I was okay. A woman at a nearby table blinked at me and said, "At least it's just champagne. Won't stain, right?" She laughed once and turned back to her conversation. I stood slowly, trying to assess the damage. My dress was damp down the side, clinging cold to my skin. It darkened the navy, made the floral pattern look like bruises. I pressed my hand over the spot and quietly made my way toward the hallway. The powder room would have towels. I didn't want to make a fuss. I didn't want to be the story. The hallway was quieter, dimmer, the music fading behind closed doors. I breathed in deeply, lavender-scented candles and something else. Powder. Perfume. Money. I found a stack of linen towels beside the sink and pressed one against the fabric of my skirt. I didn't look at myself in the mirror. I knew what I'd see. A woman trying to be invisible, half soaked in someone else's celebration. As I stepped out, still blotting the dress, I heard laughter down the corridor. Women's voices. Familiar, but sharper now. I froze. The hallway carried sound like a secret. I followed it carefully. Footsteps silent on the marble floor. Something was being said. Something not meant for me. The voices grew clearer as I stepped toward the end of the hallway, where a powder room door sat slightly ajar. Behind it, laughter. Tight, amused, dripping with something that didn't quite feel like joy. I paused. Towel still in hand, heart starting to quicken. I didn't mean to eavesdrop. But I didn't move either. "Well," a woman said, her voice unmistakably bright with sarcasm, "at least she had the good sense to stay out of the way tonight." Another voice, higher, amused. "Did you see that dress? My cleaning lady has better taste." A third chimed in, clipped and commanding. "Honestly, I was worried she'd try to make a toast or something." Laughter followed. Then a voice I recognized even before I wanted to. Brielle's mother. "Don't worry," she said breezily. "Ethan's side won't be part of the real wedding." The words hung there like smoke. I stopped breathing. "This is just for optics," she continued. "For the press, the business associates, the donors. The actual ceremony will be in Positano. Private, family only." "Which means your family," someone else said, chuckling. "Exactly." Their laughter rose again, effortless, practiced. I stood there, every cell in my body listening. I felt suddenly very aware of my shoes on the floor, of the wet patch on my skirt, of the towel in my hand that now felt absurd. "She's harmless," Brielle's mother added, sweet but provincial, like something out of a thrift store memory box. I took a step back, careful not to let my heels echo. The hallway had become too warm. My hands were shaking. The party music thumped faintly behind me. But in this hallway, everything felt still, frozen between what I had heard and what I could never unhear. I turned around and walked away slowly, towel clenched in my fist. I didn't look back. In that moment, something inside me began to quiet, not collapse, just still, like a wind retreating before the storm. They didn't know I'd heard, but I had. And nothing about this night would ever feel like sugar again. I stood outside for a while, letting the crisp air wash over my skin. The garden lights cast everything in soft gold, but I couldn't feel the warmth. I found a bench beneath the arbor, far from the noise of champagne and silverware, and sat down, still holding the now pointless towel in my lap. Somewhere behind me, a string quartet was playing something delicate and forgettable. I didn't close my eyes, but my mind drifted anyway, backward. Back to the cold mornings after George died, when Ethan was just 13. The way his backpack looked too big on his shoulders. How I'd stand by the window and watch him walk down the street, pretending I didn't feel the floor tilt under my feet with every step he took away from me. The years blurred together, tutoring math in the evenings for neighbor kids just to make grocery money, hemming dresses for the girls in choir so I could afford Ethan's science camp, making Halloween costumes from scratch with leftover fabric and safety pins. He wanted to be a doctor once. For a few months in 11th grade, it was all he talked about. I sold my wedding ring that winter when he got accepted into a summer program, told him it didn't fit anymore, told myself I didn't need a circle of gold to prove what we'd built together. College came, and with it, loans. I paid what I could, taking on extra work at the library, emptying what little savings I had left. And somehow, through all of it, I believed we were doing it together, that every graduation, every milestone was ours. But now I sat on a rented bench in borrowed light, wearing a dress that smelled faintly of mothballs and memory, realizing that maybe that version of together had faded long before tonight. Maybe I was the only one still holding on to it. My fingers gripped the edge of the bench. The music shifted behind me. A soft cheer rippled through the party. Another toast, maybe. Another thing I hadn't been invited to be part of. I let out a quiet breath, steadying myself. I had raised him to belong in rooms like that. I just hadn't expected to be the cost of admission. I was making my way slowly back inside, trying to decide whether to stay or slip out without being noticed, when I heard a voice I hadn't expected. "Celia?" It came from near the buffet, where the desserts gleamed under glass domes like jewelry. I turned and saw her, Mrs. Darnell, my old neighbor from the cul-de-sac back in Maple Hill. Her hair was silver now, shorter than I remembered, but her eyes were exactly the same. "It is you," she said, stepping forward and pulling me into a gentle hug. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "Neither was I said with a tired smile. "You look good," she added, her tone kind, though her eyes flickered to the damp patch on my skirt. I nodded. "You too." We stood there for a moment, the music humming in the distance. Then her voice dropped. "Listen, I probably shouldn't say this, but I heard something earlier, near the back terrace, where the planners were setting up." I waited. She looked around before continuing. "They were asking if the country mother had RSVP'd. One of them said, 'It's better if she doesn't come. Keeps the aesthetic clean.'" I felt the words land somewhere deep in my ribs. The country mother. Like I was a line item on a mood board they didn't approve of. "They don't want you here, Celia," she said softly, eyes filled with something between pity and apology. "I just thought you should know." I nodded slowly, pressing my lips together to keep them from trembling. "Thank you," I said. She touched my arm. "You deserve better than this." I didn't answer. Not because I disagreed, but because I wasn't sure anymore what I deserved. I watched her walk away, merging into the crowd of shining shoulders and practiced smiles. I stood alone for a while, then moved back toward the far side of the room, where no one was looking. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just stood still, listening, watching. trying to understand how I had raised a man to be loved by the world and forgotten by the one who needed him to remember. By the time Ethan took the microphone again, the room had thickened with wine and warmth. Guests leaned into one another, cheeks pink, hands lazily curled around dessert forks. The energy was light and golden, like the chandelier glow that made everyone look just a little softer. I sat at the edge of the room, where the light didn't quite reach, where people's eyes slid past me the way they do when they're scanning for someone more important. Brielle stood beside Ethan, smiling in that poised, practiced way I'd seen in bridal magazines. She looked like she'd never had to rehearse a smile in her life. Ethan cleared his throat, tapped his glass with a silver butter knife, and the room hushed again. "I just want to take a moment," he said, his voice echoing lightly against crystal, "to thank the people who've made this all possible. Brielle and I are so lucky to have the support we do." I waited. I didn't realize I was holding my breath. "To Brielle's parents, thank you. You've welcomed me with open arms. You've been my foundation, my guidance, my second family. I hope I can be half the man you already believe I am." Laughter. Applause. A woman across the table blinked away a tear. "To my brother-in-law Marcus, who gave me advice I'll never forget, and to everyone else who helped shape this night, this life. I'm grateful beyond words." He lifted his glass. Everyone followed suit. Glasses clinked, chairs shifted, murmurs of "so sweet" and "he's such a good one." I stayed still. He didn't say my name, not once. Not a quiet nod, not a "my mother who raised me." Nothing. Just that smile of his, just polished words for polished people. I looked down at my hands in my lap, the same hands that once held his fevered head against my chest, that signed loan documents, that tied his tie for prom. Hands that had never once let him go, until now, apparently, when it no longer fit the picture. The applause faded into new conversations. Dessert was served. The moment passed for everyone else. But for me, something small cracked, soundless. A kind of silence you only hear in your own heart. I was standing near the back again, near a wall of photos printed on matte paper and mounted like a gallery. Ethan and Brielle in Italy, Ethan and Brielle hiking with perfect hair, Ethan and Brielle on a yacht. All filtered, all framed. I was in none of them. I didn't expect to be. Still, it stung. I reached for a lemon tart from a passing tray, just to busy my hands. That's when it happened. A woman I didn't recognize, in a shimmering mauve dress and diamonds that caught the light like mirrors, brushed past me and paused. "Oh, there you are," she said, a little too quickly. She held out a small porcelain dish smeared with the remains of crème brûlée. "Could you take this to the kitchen? I think they're running behind on clearing." I blinked, unsure I'd heard her correctly. She didn't look at me, just pressed the plate toward my hands, already turning away. I didn't move. "Excuse me," I said, voice quiet. "I'm not." But she was already gone, rejoining a group near the piano, laughing lightly as if nothing had happened. I stood there, holding the plate. For one stunned second, I almost did it. Not because I was used to being dismissed, but because the gesture, the ease of it, had landed like something familiar, like a role people expected of women like me. I set the dish gently on the corner of a table and stepped away. No one noticed. No one looked. I walked back toward the side door, toward the shadows, feeling the edges of my composure stretch tight. The humiliation didn't burn. It chilled, like frost slowly blooming across a window pane. I had come here to celebrate my son. I had dressed carefully, smiled politely, endured the ache of being overlooked. But now it was clear. They didn't just forget me. They had no idea who I was at all. Not a mother, not a guest. Just a silhouette with good posture. Someone who could be mistaken for help. And suddenly, I understood something. This wasn't just exclusion. It was erasure. Elegant, intentional, and complete. I was in the bathroom again, not for the champagne stain this time, but simply to breathe. The mirrors were too tall, the lighting too kind to everyone but me. I stood by the sink, hands resting on cool marble, listening to the party echo faintly through the walls like a world I didn't belong to. That's when the door opened and two women entered in a whirl of perfume and satin. One of them I recognized, Brielle's younger sister. Margot, I thought. 19 or 20. Pretty in the way expensive grooming makes girls look timeless. She didn't notice me right away. I stood off to the side, quiet, unseen. The other girl was already fixing her lipstick. "Did you hear about the second wedding?" she asked, half laughing. "God, I'm so jealous." "What second wedding?" Margot said, fumbling with her phone. "The real one, in Italy. Positano, I think. Brielle's planning it with Mom. Just close family. This is just for the press and connections." "Oh, right." Margot leaned against the counter, lowering her voice like it mattered. "I forget what's been announced and what hasn't. But yeah, Mom said the overseas one will be smaller. Cleaner, you know." She tapped her nails against the marble. "Ethan's side won't be invited. Just us." My mouth went dry. I stayed perfectly still. Margot caught my reflection then, met my eyes in the mirror. Her expression stuttered. "Oh," she said. "Hi, sorry. Didn't see you." I nodded once, offering nothing. Her friend looked back and forth between us, then quickly busied herself in her purse. "Nice party," I said softly. My voice surprised me. It was calm, steady. "Yeah," Margot murmured. "Super fun." They left quickly after that, awkward and breathless, like girls trying to outrun their own carelessness. I stayed behind, hands now gripping the sink edge. Just us. Close family. The words echoed, not as a surprise, but as confirmation. Whatever this event was, it wasn't about celebration. It was performance. And I was an extra who'd wandered into the wrong scene. I pressed the towel to my skirt again, though it had dried hours ago. I suddenly needed air more than anything else. I made my way toward the exit, weaving quietly between the dancers and the photo backdrops and the strategically placed champagne towers. No one stopped me. No one noticed. I passed a group laughing near the fire pit, their teeth catching the light, their joy so practiced it looked choreographed. I walked past the guest book table, where I had never signed my name, past a tall floral arrangement that smelled faintly of lilies and eucalyptus and effort. My purse was already over my shoulder. My hand was in the pocket of my coat. I reached the front door, heart fluttering with something between relief and failure. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I didn't want to be here anymore. That's when I saw it. Something small, something misplaced, tumbling out of a purse on the floor just beside the coat check. A clutch had tipped over. No one was looking. No one had noticed the silver flash drive that rolled gently to a stop at my feet. I recognized the clutch, pale pink, glittering, the same one Brielle had set down earlier while taking photos by the staircase. I bent down before I could think, picked it up, turned it in my hand. It was light, ordinary, nondescript, the kind of thing you wouldn't notice unless you were watching closely. I looked around. No one saw. No one cared. The valet was busy talking. The door attendant was helping someone with a shawl. I slipped the drive into my coat pocket. Not with any plan. Not yet. But with the quiet sense that something had just been placed in my path for a reason. I pushed the front door open and stepped outside into the night air. It was cold, but the kind of cold that woke you up instead of pushing you under. For the first time all evening, I could breathe without pretending. I walked a few paces down the gravel, not toward the car, but toward the stillness, toward the part of the night that wasn't choreographed. I touched the pocket of my coat again. Something inside me was beginning to shift. I hadn't come looking for anything, but maybe something had been looking for me. The drive sat in the middle of the kitchen table, small and still. I had placed it on a napkin as though it were fragile or perhaps contaminated. Outside, the cicadas had started their nightly rhythm, and the wind moved faintly through the trees, rattling the back porch like someone politely asking to come in. I hadn't turned on the lights yet. The sun had just slipped away, leaving behind that pale in-between glow. I stood by the sink, arms crossed, watching the thing. My coat still hung from the chair. My heels were kicked off near the door. I hadn't even made tea. I'd driven straight home after the party, the silence in the car louder than the music I didn't turn on. All I could think about was that final moment, when the flash drive landed at my feet like a breadcrumb on some path I hadn't meant to follow. I wasn't sure what I expected to find. Maybe schedules, maybe rehearsal footage, maybe nothing at all. But something deeper than curiosity pulled at me now. Not nosiness, not revenge. Something more like instinct. I walked to the drawer and took out the old laptop I used for bookkeeping and occasional emails. The keys were dusty. The screen flickered once before warming into life. I plugged in the drive. It blinked once. Recognized. A single folder. No name. I hesitated. My finger hovered over the trackpad. I looked around the kitchen. Still the same space where Ethan had eaten cereal in Superman pajamas, where George once read the Sunday paper out loud. I clicked. The folder opened. Inside, a collection of videos, no labels, just timestamps. I stared at them for a long moment. I didn't need to watch. I could remove it now, pretend I'd never seen. But something inside me whispered otherwise. They've already decided you don't matter. What more can you lose? I clicked on the first file. The video began to play. The screen lit up with Brielle's face. Soft lit, perfectly composed, framed like a confession meant only for herself. She sat cross-legged on a velvet couch, a glass of wine in one hand, the camera angled deliberately casual. Diary log 4, she began, smirking slightly. Okay, update. Mom is officially losing her mind over napkin shades again, pale ivory versus antique blush. As if anyone will even notice. I swear she's more stressed than me. She laughed, light, amused, a little cruel. Anyway, Ethan's out again, some meeting with vendors. God, he's sweet, but the boy needs supervision. If I left this entire wedding to him, we'd end up with, ham sandwiches and paper plates. No offense. She took a sip, set the glass down. Her tone shifted. Honestly, I can't wait for the real wedding. The Italy one. Just us. No weird small-town baggage. No dusty people in second-hand dresses trying to pretend they belong. My breath caught. The wine in her glass shimmered as she spoke again. Once we're married, he'll cut the cord. He always said he wants to leave the past behind. That dusty woman? She rolled her eyes. Gone. She smiled then. A soft, satisfied smile that didn't reach her eyes. The video ended. I sat there, back rigid, staring at the screen long after the image faded to black. A second video loaded automatically. I paused it before it started. I wasn't ready. Not yet. I pressed my fingers to my mouth, feeling the warmth of my breath. Not dusty. Not gone. Not yet. My eyes returned to the laptop screen. There were 10 more files, labeled only by time. I didn't move. I didn't cry. Something colder than grief settled in my bones. This wasn't misunderstanding. This wasn't forgetfulness. This was planned, scripted, recorded in her own words. I reached for a notepad and slowly wrote the timestamp of the video. One moment of many. A new kind of silence filled the room, heavier than before, but somehow clearer. For the first time in days, I felt no confusion, only clarity. The second video opened mid-sentence. Brielle sitting with someone off camera, face gleaming under soft overhead light. Her voice was lighter this time, wine-drunk and giggly, but it was the kind of laughter that carried teeth. "No, seriously," she said, brushing hair from her shoulder. I Googled her. There was a pause, then a scoff. She used to teach 3rd grade, in some rural district I've never even heard of. Like, bless her heart, right? Someone off-screen snorted. Brielle leaned in toward the camera, as if confessing something delicious. Who invites that to a 6-figure wedding? I mean, she's sweet, I guess, in a creaky, Hallmark kind of way, but Ethan really needs to get over the whole I owe her everything complex. She plucked something from a fruit plate. You know, like, cool, she raised you. Great, lots of moms do that. Doesn't mean you let her drag her thrift store shoes through your new life. A beat of silence. Then she looked directly into the lens. I'm not marrying his past. I'm marrying what he could be, and that doesn't include a retired schoolmarm who still irons tablecloths. My hand was over my mouth again. Not from shock. No, that had passed. This was a quieter ache. Not because she said it, but because she believed it. She believed kindness was weakness. That modesty was something to discard. I reached for my tea, now gone cold. My reflection in the laptop screen was faint, gray, a ghost watching her own dismissal. I didn't rewind. I didn't watch again. I simply sat still as the video faded, the timestamp logging itself into my memory like a wound. I had taught 30 children a year for nearly 2 decades, helped them spell their names, solve their fears, believe they mattered. I had loved Ethan through every scraped knee and midnight flu and heartbreak. But to her, I was a footnote, a blemish, something to hide beneath napkins. The screen went black again, but I could still hear her voice. I know who she is. I did too now, and for the first time, I wondered if Ethan did. The final file was shorter. No velvet couch, no giggles. Just a wide frame of a study, dimly lit, bookshelves behind them, fire crackling faintly. Ethan sat at the edge of a leather armchair, shoulders slightly hunched, tie loosened. Across from him, in a cream blouse and pearl earrings, was Brielle's mother. Olivia, composed, measured, practiced. She wasn't smiling. Not this time. Ethan, she said calmly, folding her hands. This is not about cutting anyone off. It's about starting clean. I know, he replied. His voice sounded younger than I remembered. Unsure, but the account? My father left that for college, and it served that purpose. But it's under her name still, yes? Olivia's tone was silk-covered stone. She's not going to use it. She's not investing. She doesn't even understand how that kind of money should be working. You're a man now. You're getting married. It's time you took ownership of your own future. He rubbed his temple. I just don't want to hurt her. You're not. Olivia leaned in, voice low. You're protecting her legacy by honoring it in a way that builds something. Brielle and I have advisors, people who can help, but they need authority. Power of attorney, just temporary, is the first step. Ethan didn't speak. He stared at a paper in his hands. Olivia gently tapped the table between them. We'll have you sign after the engagement. Quietly. No press. Just family. The screen faded. That was it. No shouting. No villain monologue. Just bureaucracy dressed in pearls. My hand gripped the table edge. The account. George's account. Years of savings. Carefully placed in Ethan's name but guarded under mine. He'd asked me once why. Because love doesn't know how money changes people, I told him. But time does. Let it watch first. Time had watched. And now, so had I. Not through accusation. Through evidence. Through their own words. I sat back. The house around me was quiet again. But something inside me wasn't. Not anymore. The woman they thought they'd dismissed? She had watched. She had listened. And now, she remembered. It had been years since I opened that drawer. The one in George's old roll-top desk, tucked beneath a stack of birth certificates, insurance slips, and faded tax returns. But I knew exactly where the will was. Some things, even when buried, stay close. My hands didn't tremble as I unfolded it, though the paper crackled like it remembered its purpose before I did. I sat at the kitchen table, where Ethan once colored dinosaurs, where George once balanced checkbooks, and I read the lines again, slowly this time, deliberately. The clause came near the end. In the event that my son, Ethan Joseph Alcott, enters into a legal marriage under circumstances determined to be of coercion, manipulation, or undue influence, particularly in connection to access or control of the trust, said inheritance shall revert to the surviving parent or guardian pending legal affirmation. I stared at the word undue influence, my finger tracing it like a bruise. George had been so meticulous. Not controlling, just cautious. He used to say, money doesn't change people, it reveals them. He must have seen something early on. A fear, maybe. A sense that Ethan would one day be torn between obligation and ambition. I leaned back in my chair. The house felt different now. Less haunted. More protective. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was awake. I thought about that flash drive, tucked now in a small envelope by my nightstand, about the footage, the laughter, the pearl-draped strategy meeting. I thought about my son's face, confused, quiet, not cruel, but not courageous either. Then I looked at George's signature at the bottom of the will. Strong, undeniable. He'd written those lines not just as a father, but as a safeguard. For both of us, the law was on my side, but that wasn't what gave me strength. What steadied my breath was knowing that somewhere, in some quiet way, George had prepared for this. Not revenge, not punishment, protection. I folded the paper back carefully, slid it into the envelope. Then I stood. Tomorrow would come, and with it, my answer. I didn't sleep that night, but I didn't pace either. I sat in the den, lights low, holding a warm cup of chamomile between my palms. No tears, no fury, just silence, like the kind that arrives when a storm has passed but left everything changed. The old me, the one who left that party damp, dismissed and invisible, was no longer seated in this house. Something in me had shifted. Not hardened, no, but straightened, like a spine remembering how to stand. I thought about marching over to their mansion, confronting Ethan with the flash drive, waving the will in Olivia's face, watching the smugness unravel from Brielle's perfect posture. But that wouldn't be me. That would be the woman they imagined. Dramatic, bitter, small. And I was none of those things. They had mistaken quiet for weakness, dignity for irrelevance. I would not correct them with shouting. I would show them, on their stage, in their world, calm, deliberate, and unshakable. The engagement brunch was the next day, an afternoon affair full of speeches and photographers, the kind of event Brielle's family lived for. That would be the moment. Public. Poised. Unavoidable. I would wear the same dress, still slightly damp at the hem. I would bring a wrapped box, inside it, the flash drive. A note with the trust clause. Nothing else. No accusations, no drama. Just truth, elegantly framed. I finished my tea, stood. My reflection in the mirror looked older, yes, but also sharper, like time had finally carved away everything unnecessary. They had tried to erase me. Now I would remind them I existed, and I would not be rewritten. The morning sky was overcast, the kind of pale gray that blurred the line between dawn and indecision. I packed the flash drive carefully, placing it in a small ivory gift box lined with cotton. No ribbons, just a note, folded neatly beneath it. Thought you might want this back. I didn't wear anything new. Same old dress, same sensible shoes, the ones I wore to George's funeral, and again when Ethan graduated. Quiet markers of endings and beginnings. The drive to the estate was longer this time, though the miles hadn't changed, only the silence. I didn't play music. Just the hum of tires on asphalt and the occasional whisper of wind against the window pane. I passed the same rows of trimmed hedges, the same arched iron gate that creaked open at the press of a button. This time, the guard recognized me. He hesitated, then let me in without question. Funny how presence changes once you've been seen. The estate was still humming with cleanup. Florists removing centerpieces, staff collecting glasses from the lawn. A white van idled near the side entrance. No guests. Just aftermath. I walked slowly, cradling the box like it held something fragile. It didn't weigh much, but it carried everything. A maid opened the door with a hesitant smile. I smiled back, polite. I left something yesterday, I said. For Ethan. She nodded, stepping aside. No one questioned me. Not this time. I was the forgotten guest returning, not for confrontation, but closure. I spotted Ethan through the large bay window, seated at the kitchen island, hunched over his phone. Brielle stood near him, hair wrapped in a towel, sipping something green from a glass. I took a breath, then knocked on the glass gently, holding the box up with one hand. Ethan looked up, his face shifted. Surprise, then guilt, then something I couldn't name. He came to the door slowly, as if uncertain which version of me he might find. "Mom," he said, voice low. I offered a small smile. "I won't stay. Just need a moment. Both of you, please." He glanced back at Brielle. She stepped forward, arms crossed. I walked in past them, past the polished tiles and curated art, and into the truth. We stood in the sitting room. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, landing softly on the ivory rug. It was a beautiful space, elegant, intentional, false, like everything else here. Ethan's hand twitched near his pocket, still holding his phone. Brielle hovered at the edge of the room, arms tight across her chest, towel now gone, hair damp and pulled into a slick ponytail. She looked at me like she was expecting theater. Instead, I offered quiet. I opened the gift box and placed it on the glass coffee table between us. The flash drive caught the light, its edges glinting like something sharper than it should have been. "What's this?" Brielle asked, though her voice faltered. She already knew. "You dropped it yesterday," I said evenly. "Figured you might want it returned before it fell into the wrong hands." Ethan paled. He looked down at the drive, and something in him visibly buckled. I saw the moment recognition hit. The video logs, Olivia's voice. His own. Brielle said nothing. Her jaw tightened, lips pressed into a thin line. I took a folded sheet of paper from my purse and placed it gently on top. "Just a copy," I said, meeting Ethan's eyes. "It's from your father's will. A clause. About undue influence." Brielle's voice came fast then. "You're threatening us?" "I'm informing you," I replied calmly, "of the stakes, the trust, the intentions behind it." Ethan's eyes didn't leave the paper. I saw the war behind them. Pride, shame, loyalty, fear. But mostly, I saw a son who had gotten lost somewhere between love and legacy. "I didn't mean," he started. "I know," I said quietly, "but you did." Silence stretched long and thin between us. No yelling, no scenes, just consequence. "So what now?" Brielle asked, arms still folded. "You ruin us?" I shook my head. "No, I just return what was never yours to begin with." I stood then, gathering my coat, my dignity. "What you do with it is up to you." As I turned to leave, I heard the creak of leather behind me, Ethan sinking slowly into the couch, box still unopened. Brielle didn't follow. Neither did guilt. I had left that part behind. I was halfway to the door when I felt it, the weight of what hadn't been said still pressing down on the room like thick velvet drapes. I paused. Not for drama, just for air. I turned back, only slightly, just enough to see Ethan still hunched over the unopened box, his fingertips lightly tracing its edge as if hoping it might vanish. Brielle stood stiff beside the fireplace, gaze fixed somewhere over my shoulder. "I watched the videos," I said, my voice steady, my words unadorned. Not to hurt, but to state. A simple fact, like the time of day. Ethan blinked slowly, shame moving across his face like a tide that refused to recede. Brielle looked at me then, sharply, like a child daring a teacher. But there was no lecture left in me. "I'm not here for revenge," I continued, "and I'm certainly not here to beg for a seat at a table built on lies." Brielle scoffed. "You're just bitter." I looked at her fully now, not as my son's fiancée, not as the girl with the curated life and designer smile, but as someone who had built her kingdom on arrogance and calculation. "No," I said simply. "I'm done." The silence that followed wasn't cold. It was clean. I saw Ethan's mouth twitch, as if trying to form an apology he hadn't earned the right to speak. I didn't give him the chance. Because forgiveness isn't owed. It's offered, and I wasn't ready. "I raised you with everything I had," I said to him gently. "Love, patience, pride. And maybe that was my mistake, thinking that was enough." He finally looked up. "Mom." I raised a hand, not to hush him, to close the chapter. "You chose this," I said, "not just her. This version of yourself." I walked toward the door once more, the morning sun warming my back. "I'm not angry, Ethan. I'm just no longer small enough to fit in the world you built." And this time, I didn't pause. By the time I reached the foyer, my steps had slowed. Not out of hesitation, but intention. I turned one last time, a folded copy of the will still tucked beneath my arm. Ethan stood now, awkward and uncertain, his spine as unsure as his heart. "I forgot something," I said, lifting the document with care, as though handling a shared memory. "This, your father's will. You were just a boy when we last read it. Now you're a man, or something like one." Ethan's brows furrowed as I walked the paper back over to the coffee table, unfolding it with the same reverence I once reserved for bedtime stories. "There's a clause. I said, my voice softer now, not out of mercy, but clarity. It was written for your protection, in case someone tried to use you, bend you, strip away who you are in favor of who they want you to be. Brielle stepped forward, tense. What does that even mean? It means, I said, looking at Ethan now, that if you proceed with this marriage under pressure or manipulation, the entire estate reverts to me. That's not a threat. It's the law. Your father made sure of it. His hands clenched into loose fists, not in anger, but confusion, like he was trying to reconcile two maps of the same place. I thought you didn't care about the money, he said, almost accusing. I tilted my head. I don't, but I care about what it represents. Legacy, sacrifice, integrity. Brielle muttered something under her breath. I let it hang there, irrelevant. This isn't just about inheritance, I continued. It's about whether the man I raised still lives inside you. The one who used to ask why some kids had no lunch and cried when he saw a dying bird. Ethan didn't respond. He couldn't. I'll leave this here, I said, tapping the will lightly. I'm not demanding anything, just making sure you understand the truth before you sign your future away. And with that, I left the document beside the unopened gift box, proof that truth, once offered, doesn't need to scream. It simply waits. The door had barely shut behind me when I heard it, the sound of something deeper than argument. A groan, a shatter, not of glass, but of illusion. I didn't look back, but the words followed me anyway. I thought you'd be proud if I became someone they respected. His voice wasn't loud. It was fractured. Not the booming certainty of a man defending his choices, but the raw, unguarded cry of a son still learning the cost of being liked over being loved. I stood on the front steps for a long moment, coat draped over my arm, the morning breeze brushing against my face like a reminder. Breathe. Inside, his voice rose again, muffled but thick with guilt. I did everything right. The career, the connections, the suit, the smile. I played the part. A pause, and then softer. And I kept waiting for it to feel like me. I imagined Brielle now, arms flailing in frustration, probably rolling her eyes, dismissing emotion the way she did anything she couldn't control. Ethan had always wanted approval, not applause, not power, just the warm, steady beam of someone saying, I see you. But somewhere along the way, he mistook performance for purpose, and now he was standing at the altar of other people's expectations, unsure if he was the groom or the sacrifice. I thought you'd be proud, he'd said, and the truth was, I had been, until he stopped being himself. I didn't go back in. I didn't need to. That was his moment. And sometimes sons need to fall apart without the safety net of a mother's arms, because some lessons don't belong to us, no matter how badly we want to soften the landing. So I stepped off the porch, heels clicking softly on the stone, and let the silence finish the sentence he was finally brave enough to start. I hadn't made it to my car when the door slammed open behind me. You think this changes anything? Brielle's voice cracked through the air like a whip, sharp, desperate, unraveling. She marched across the driveway in bare feet, silk robe whipping around her like some dethroned empress. You're just a bitter, washed-up nothing, she shouted, finger pointed, voice shrill. You wear a funeral dress to an engagement party and think you're some noble warrior. I said nothing. I turned slowly and looked at her, not with anger, not even pity, just clarity. She kept going. You raised a soft little boy who thought third-grade spelling bees made him special. You gave him nothing. We gave him everything. Her voice was cracking now, rage burning through the shell of composure she'd worn like perfume. I pulled my phone from my coat pocket and calmly pressed record. Not for revenge, for insurance. Truth deserves a witness, even when it screams. She noticed, too late. Her voice faltered. "You're recording me? Are you serious?" Still, I said nothing. Because what could I say to a girl who thought worth came from handbags and surnames? So I let her speak. I let her show Ethan and herself exactly who she was without the designer lighting. And when she ran out of venom, when the echo of her own cruelty finally reached her ears, I clicked the screen off. "Thank you," I said softly, slipping the phone back into my coat. And I walked away, not triumphant, not cruel, just certain. Because silence isn't surrender. Sometimes it's the final word. It took 3 days. 3 days from the moment I uploaded the clip, anonymously, carefully, to when the first headline appeared on a local society page. Heiress-to-be caught in explosive rant. Engagement crumbles under scandal. I hadn't done it for spectacle. I'd done it because people like Brielle and her mother lived behind curated smiles and glass invitations, harming in whispers and expecting no echo. But truth, real, raw, unscripted, echoes when it's heard aloud. The video spread, at first, among the bridal forums and society gossips, then to wider circles. Even national blogs picked it up, attaching words like entitled, vindictive, and exposed next to stills of her with twisted lips and fire in her eyes. I didn't watch it go viral. I didn't need to. The town's silence did that for me. Brielle's family withdrew their press announcements. The venue canceled due to unforeseen changes. The caterer demanded full payment up front. Her mother's charity events were quietly removed from next month's listings. And the engagement? Officially postponed indefinitely. Unofficially, dead on arrival. A neighbor I hadn't heard from in years left a pie on my porch. No note, just warmth, flaky crust, and quiet solidarity. I didn't feel joy, not the kind people expect. Just justice. A quiet settling of the scales. Somewhere in the distance, I knew Ethan was flailing, his world unraveling, image cracked like a wine glass left too close to the edge. But I didn't chase the pieces. Some things, they must gather themselves. So I returned to my garden, to my books, to the quiet life I had built on nothing but honesty and love. And for the first time in a long time, it felt enough. I was no longer the woman who showed up underdressed and overlooked. I was the woman who saw through the glitter and refused to disappear. It was raining when he came. Not the dramatic kind, just a steady drizzle that softened the edges of the world. I watched his car pull up from the kitchen window, the same one I used to stand at while heating his after-school soup. That memory hurt more than I expected. He sat in his car for a long time before coming to the door. When he finally knocked, it wasn't loud. Just tired. I opened it without a word. Ethan stood there, no umbrella, damp at the collar, a man unsure if he was welcome in his own mother's house. "Hi," he said, his voice raw. I didn't know if you'd answer." I stepped aside. Not a smile, not a frown, just space. He took it. We sat at the old dining table, the one with the scratch he made carving his name into it at 7. His eyes drifted there. Mine didn't. "I messed up," he said finally. I thought if I just fit into their world, I could bring you with me. And when that didn't work, I thought I could leave you behind and not feel it." I stayed quiet. There are some confessions a mother shouldn't interrupt. "I don't know who I am anymore," he whispered. "Everything feels fake." And I let it be. I looked at him then. Really looked. And for the first time in years, I didn't see the polished son in tailored suits. I saw the boy who once cried when his kite got caught in a tree, who said sorry with trembling lips and a handmade card. "I'm listening," I said gently. His shoulders dropped a little, as if the door had opened just enough to let him breathe. But I didn't offer forgiveness. Not yet. Some bridges aren't crossed in one step. They're rebuilt, beam by beam. And for now, I simply handed him tea, not as a symbol, just warmth. And that was enough. For today. The envelope came on a Wednesday. No text. No whisper through a cousin. Just an envelope. Thick, embossed, addressed in careful calligraphy. This time, I opened it without dread. Inside was a single card, navy blue with silver foil trim. At the top, annual gala, honoring community educators. And below, in bolder script, celebrating Celia May Thornton, a legacy of quiet impact. I read it twice, then a third time. Tucked beneath the invitation was a handwritten note. "Ms. Thornton, you may not remember me, but I was in your 3rd grade class. You once told me my words could build bridges. I now lead a company that builds real ones, and I never forgot the woman who taught me the first. This year's gala is yours. Gratefully, Marcus Eves, CEO, Everbridge Infrastructure." I sat down, the letter still in my hands, heart knocking gently against the ribs that once cradled a grieving widow, a tired teacher, a mother. A gala. Not an apology. Not a pity invite. A celebration. Word must have spread. Not just the video, but the real story beneath it. The decades of early mornings and lesson plans, the patience spent on children who never knew they were seen. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about Ethan anymore. It was a mirror held to a life that mattered. And it reflected something I hadn't expected to see. Dignity. Not given, not claimed, simply recognized. I looked around the house. The chipped mug on the counter, the old photo of my husband in his corduroy blazer, the stack of books I still meant to read. I smiled. And for the first time in weeks, maybe years, I felt seen. Not as a mother out of place, but as a woman who had quietly shaped the world. The dress still hung in the back of the closet, soft navy, a threadbare memory of another lifetime. The same one I wore to Harold's retirement dinner. The same one I wore to Ethan's engagement party, damp with spilled champagne and stares. I held it up to the light. It hadn't changed, but I had. That night, I slipped it on again, this time not wondering whether it was enough, but knowing that I was. At the gala, no one asked if I was with catering. No one glanced sideways. When I stepped onto the stage, the room rose. Hundreds of strangers, standing for a woman they'd only just met but somehow already knew. Marcus greeted me with a hug, his voice thick. "Your words built everything I've ever made." I didn't speak long. Just a few words about chalkboards and patience. About planting seeds in children and waiting years to see if they bloom. When I returned to my seat, someone whispered, "She carries herself like royalty." And I realized I hadn't been dressing to impress. I'd been dressing in memory, in meaning, in love. Later that night, I caught a glimpse of myself in one of the mirrored panels lining the ballroom wall. Same dress, same shoulders, same hands. But where once I saw a woman hoping to be invited, now I saw someone who never needed the invitation in the first place. Because value doesn't fade with fabric. It deepens with time. And it turns out, what they saw as old clothes was just a mother who never needed to impress anyone to be priceless. This story was intense, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.